Hello, I'm Steve Levine, and this is Live Chat with the Electric, presented by The Information. In November 2021, the U.S. House passed the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and 9 months later, the Inflation Reduction Act. Together, the bills authorized up to $250 billion in spending to support the creation of an EV and battery industry across the U.S. and allied nations. At the time, the U.S. had no such supply chain to speak of, and the bills amounted to the country's largest peacetime industrial policy ever. To help lead the effort, the Department of Energy appointed today's guest, David Howell, in part to help administer $6 billion in grants for companies developing next-generation battery components and processing critical minerals for batteries. Howell landed the job because for much of the previous 25 years, he was the department's Mr. Battery. Before the IRA and infrastructure laws came along, Howell administered the biggest pot of battery research money in this country and most parts of the world. Howell's grants helped to develop most of today's leading EV battery chemistries, including NMC and LFP. In short, no one in the federal government knew as much about batteries and the leading personalities behind them than Howell. 2 months ago, Howell retired and joined SMI, a government affairs consulting firm. We speak to him at a critical moment. His former DOE office is preparing to award another $2 billion in battery industry and critical minerals grants, and the Loan Programs Office is assessing $262 billion in loan applications. How should investors and next-gen companies navigate the IRA amid the tension with China and a consequential election at home? Welcome, Dave. Are you here? Can we hear you?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Happy to be here, Steve. Sorry about that.
Great, thanks. A note to the audience. Dave and I will speak for 30 minutes, and then Dave will take questions for 15 minutes. If you have a question, drop it into the chat at any time, and Dave will get to as many as he can. So, Dave, to set the context, let's start with some history. You started working with the DOE in 1999. Can we get a brief snapshot on how the battery and automotive world looked at that time?
Yeah, thank you, Steve. One of the things I see today is sort of the fruition of a long-term vision, and not only from the Department of Energy, but even from industry as well. That started, like you said, about 25 years ago or so. But that vision has come to fruition, when we look at what's happening today in the lithium battery market. And it's actually been expanding beyond what that initial vision pictured. So, in 2003, when we were really focused on work on lithium-ion batteries, specifically to develop an alternative to nickel metal hydride batteries, it was a very small, nascent lithium battery industry here in the United States. And, working with the auto companies, with the United States Advanced Battery Consortium, with many of the research agencies and industry here, you see that small niche industry really, really exploding here in the United States and across the world. So, we were really focused on hybrid electric vehicles at that time, high power batteries with lithium ion systems, and then morphed into plug-in hybrids and electric vehicles as we actually made progress. So, we began entering the HEV market, Mercedes, BMW hybrids, and then of course the PHEV with the Chevy Volt in around 2010 timeframe. And then, of course, the EV market with Tesla and Nissan in 2010. So, and then over the next 20 years, or 10 years, you basically saw a very steady acceleration of the industry in the 2010 to 2020, and then it just became turbocharged. So, what I see in the future is cost and performance and safety are still really important, but now what you see is manufacturing and supply chain issues drive a lot of large scale investments.
Okay, let's hold it there. We'll get to the future. I wanted to in adding to the context, in terms of policy, in terms of the of really high profile White House policy, we're looking at 2009, 2010. Obama infuses the battery and EV industry with $2.5 billion. When before that, I remember, it was a big deal if you doled out at the vehicle technologies office 100,000, 250. If anyone ever got $1 million, they thought they were king. And so suddenly there's 2.5 billion. But at that time, battery costs were $1,200 per kilowatt hour. Now we're talking 2009 or so, 2010. So if you were going to put that battery into a typical EV, the battery alone would be like 70,000, which is quite a lot. At that time, you envisioned the idea, and you publicly said this, in your presentations, of the $100 per kilowatt hour battery, an order of magnitude cheaper. Can you talk about what you were thinking of at that time?
So sure. So like as I mentioned, the early 2000s, we were really focused on hybrid vehicle batteries. So we costed those batteries out at $1 per kilowatt. Right. So our target was $20 kilowatt, worked with the auto companies and USABC to develop those targets. For electric vehicles, even at that time, we had established that we really needed to be at $150 per kilowatt hour for a battery to make EVs even attractive. Right. And so, like I said, the next decade, most of the work was on high power lithium ion batteries. And as we continue to improve the performance of those batteries, the power, the capacity, and the cycle life and calendar life, we really started morphing more toward the electric vehicle type battery. So you're right, about 2009, we were probably still somewhere just below $1,000 kilowatt hour. And we do base, when we base those numbers, we were just basing those numbers on a gigawatt hour type factory, a 10 gigawatt hour plant that could produce enough batteries to supply 100,000 vehicles, right? And so we started really looking, but what we did see is that auto companies were very serious about at least getting into that EV space, Tesla, Nissan, and GM in this country particularly, and our R&D budget continued to grow. Now, I will say that, before that time, most of the large money was through USABC. A lot of the companies like Johnson Controls Saft, A123, LG Chem, we would have $5 million programs with those companies matched by them. So, roughly a $10 million battery development program going on. So, it wasn't all, small R&D activities, but, what we did see though is a certain interest, because we had developed the technology to the point where it was certainly competitive, and the lithium ion battery, capacity was attractive to electric vehicles, and certain interest to go into the EV type architectures. And our budgets were going up in R&D. We got the Recovery Act grants to put out, the first tranche of battery and battery materials manufacturing facilities. We believe it or not, most people don't realize that we let 38 grants, cost shared grants, with that money. 31 of those plants today are still in operation. Now, some are always struggling and stuff like that, but they've still survived. Many of them still survived and formed a lot of the basis for what we see today.
Right. This is your counterpoint, and I think rightly so to uh, Solyndra maniacs. I don't know. I don't know
Well,
what
there
word.
was some big, okay, so there were some big failures, right?
Yeah.
And in the federal government, we do take some risks, but when failures happen, that's really, really hard to take like that. So, Solyndra was one of those. A123 was another, right? So, but we can't let those those high risk projects overshadow what went well, right?
Yeah. Let's move to now and going forward. The SPAC mania, you called it the turbocharge. What happened in 20 and 21? That's over. And the batteries in almost all EVs now are using LFP, or they're using NMC, or derivations, NCA. And and the industry has gotten to near to or at $100 per kilowatt hours and less. CATL is talking about $56 per kilowatt hour LFP battery. Um, are these incumbent batteries good enough for the industry? Does it really need the next gen silicon, lithium metal, and solid state batteries at least well into the 2030s?
So, I think you hit the right word. These are now incumbent batteries, and they are very attractive for the use, right? And cost wise, certainly competitive. That's where some of the information I mentioned on emphasis now sort of moving toward manufacturing and supply chain issues. And so some of these new generations of batteries will use less less cobalt, less nickel, and instead of graphite, less graphite, or maybe even switch to a lithium metal type system. So those are attractive. And once you go to the higher capacity batteries, like the solid state using a lithium metal cathode, you can significant, that really gets you down to that $50 per kilowatt hour battery and a non-flammable battery, right? So
Mhm.
safety could be attractive as well. So what you're seeing is, you got an incumbent, new technologies literally have to beat out the incumbent, right?
Yeah, yeah. And so your answer is kind of right in the middle there. They have to beat the incumbent, but you're saying that there's a real upside to to going to the next gen.
That's
Uh,
correct. Yeah.
yeah.
So if
Now,
you, I mean, in the Battery 500 program, for instance, we're trying to develop a battery cell that, provides 500 watt hours per kilogram or even higher energy density. And that's literally to make the battery smaller or lighter weight, or literally make the car go at a longer range, right? Without increasing cost. So, there's still some attractive things to do, a lot of headroom for improvement. And of course, when we talk about the supply chain issues, substitute materials, it's easy to talk about substitutes, but once you put them in a battery cell and see all the electrochemistry reactions going on, you find out that it's very hard work and hard to do.
right. You touch one part of the battery and
Yeah,
you end up affecting everything else. It's not quite easy. I wanted to talk for a second about LFP. So China vastly dominates the world's LFP supply. Uh, uh, Yet LFP, as you were pointing out, it involves far fewer supply bottlenecks than NMC. It's the battery of choice for Tesla, for Chinese automakers. Is gaining an LFP, a large LFP supply independent of China, an issue of national economic security?
Yes, and the short answer is yes. One of the things in the Federal Consortium for Advanced Batteries, which I had the privilege to chair, um, is the goal was to actually develop a battery industry that was resilient and robust. And so part of that is having alternatives to alternative chemistries to use when you need to. And of course, like you said, LFP is a workhorse chemistry, right? And it competes with the NMC type cathode materials or lithium batteries. And so, I don't know that it's one or the other. It's probably a combination of both as we go forward. And developing that resilient battery supply chain it's important to have alternatives in the mix and not one single chemistry.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the reason I worded it that way, Dave, is that with NMC, we're scaled up, right? The South Koreans are well scaled up. Their LG especially is head to head with CATL in terms of quality, and the South Koreans are building in the United States, all three big companies, whereas we're starting from zero, almost from zero with LFP. So while you say, we need both, there's a big difference between where we are. So does the government need to get more behind LFP, to give it a shot?
No, no, I don't agree with that statement. And here's the reason why. We can make LFP cathode materials and we can make LFP cells. We actually were the inventors, we being the US, were inventors of this technology, right? And so we do know it, right? And I disagree that when you really look at the supply chain, we see a lot of investment in cell manufacturing. We're starting to see more in upstream materials manufacturing and production. But when it comes to cathode materials, whether it's an NMC type or an LFP type, we're starting from ground zero. We being the US, right?
Yeah.
We have some incumbents and allied partners, like you mentioned, the Japanese and the South Koreans that certainly make it in Japan and South Korea. But as it comes to a domestic supply of these materials, we're just getting started. And you mentioned the bipartisan infrastructure law, the first program that we actually awarded. We awarded the first LFP production facility in the United States from that to help get things started. But we also, alongside that, awarded NMC type production facilities as well. So we need to do both is really the bottom line.
Okay. Let me also ask you, conversely, going at this another way. I'm wondering about silicon. So if China has a grip on the battery supply chain, its biggest grip is on graphite. Right? It's by some measures 100% of the processed supply. So I'm wondering, is silicon strategic material that can replace a significant portion of the graphite that the U.S. imports from China, and potentially weakening that grip?
It's not only about silicon, right? And the answer to your question is yes, it's a very important material. But the actual natural graphite is where it is, right? But you also have synthetic graphite, and the typical anode is a mixture of natural graphite and synthetic graphite. And now you're starting to see more of a mix with silicon, 5%, 10%. That helps a lot. Or sort of the diversity of materials going into the anode, which allows you to use less and less natural graphite. So To answer your question, yes, substitute materials are additive materials that include that increase the capacity, increase the performance of the material set itself is really important. That's another reason to continue work on lithium metal, right, as an anode material.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, let's switch now to policy. So there's much public worrying. You see it every day about China's lead in the industry and the Western industry pullback. Now, 2 years in, how is the US positioned, and how should companies be thinking about this moment?
Sure. So let me first start by China, right? You know, you may have heard the term "Made in China 2025," which was a policy that China put in play in 2015, right? And what you see, it was a resounding success for China. And so no surprise there when you put hundreds of billions of dollars into capturing the manufacturing of a certain product, you're probably going to make a lot of progress doing so. And that's what they've done, right? And so what you see with the BIL and the IRA is sort of the American way of doing the same thing. Okay. And so, and with that, we can be successful. And I will say we will be successful. And you're starting to really see that success come to fruition in the United States. A lot of that has to do with private sector investment. I mean, the major companies are putting hundreds of billions of dollars to set up cell manufacturing or materials manufacturing here in the United States. And so 2 years in, we've seen a lot of progress. And I would say this is more than 2 years in, right? I think we really started seeing this in the around 2020, 2021 timeframe. And just an anecdotal, and when we did our Federal Consortium for Advanced Battery supply chain report for the administration, at that point we could show that the U.S. had the capacity to produce about 59 gigawatt hours of battery cells. By 2025, that's going to be about 300 gigawatt hours capability installed in the United States. So you're seeing a huge progress being made. And then alongside that, you need a lot of the material supply production plants to actually, locate here as well. And you're starting to see that as well.
Okay. And then let's switch to the election. We're in election year, and Donald Trump is leading in the polls. If the election were held today, it looks like he would win. He has said that he'd like to repeal the IRA, and also most recently he gave a couple of speeches where he welcomed Chinese companies to build their EV plants in the United States and make cars here. Both of these ideas, they kind of flip, not judging them, but just saying that they flip what the Obama administration and what Senator Manchin conceived of. I'm wondering how you think, like, under a Trump presidency, are you thinking about how that might change? For example, your job, navigating people through the process, through the government process.
So sure, I think, if there is a change in administration, I think you will see some changes, but, realize that walking back legislation as expansive as the IRA is going to be difficult. So to start with, you must have the majority of the House and the Senate on board, right? Which could happen, but even But even if you have the majority of the House and the Senate on board, you also have to take into account activities that have already been awarded and contracted, and activities that are already underway using those funds. Typically, administrations aren't willing to walk back those types of activities, those types of contracts. Much of the IRA investments, require private sector commitments as well. So you do have to navigate through those issues. So it's not so straightforward to repeal a legislation like that. And the IRA supports domestic manufacturing and efforts to establish that resilient supply chain, things that resonate with both sides of the aisle. And you mentioned foreign investment. Regarding foreign investment in the U.S., we have seen this before, right? We've seen in the 1960s German companies investing heavily in U.S. industry. 1970s and 80s, the Japanese companies with high efficiency vehicles. In the 1990s and 2000s with South Korean vehicle companies, right? So somehow we as a nation are able to assimilate foreign companies into the U.S. and the way of doing business in the U.S. and develop a level playing field for U.S. companies. So the biggest issue is when foreign governments put their thumb on that scale, right? And a wave of low-cost imports invader shores. But typically when you're talking about manufacturing in the U.S., you can have a more level playing field, and it's also U.S. jobs. So, with the IRA activities, and particularly with the 48C tax credit activities, there are requirements for domestic manufacturing supply chains where companies can only receive those incentives if their supply chain meets those 30D FEOC type standards.
Yeah. So this is super interesting, Dave. So I take what you're saying is chill, take down the temperature a little bit. It's BYD, NIO, whomever, XPeng sell their cars in the United States, and CATL as well. CATL batteries. We've already said we don't have an LFP supply chain. CATL has the technology at this stage. The history is we're alarmed at first, but then they do foreign actors do assimilate. Am I getting you right?
No, I think so. I think the U.S. has always been open to investment, and particularly investment in manufacturing companies from foreign sources, right? Those foreign sources do not necessarily get the U.S. federal government incentives. That's number one, right? Those incentives are in place, and so hopefully, it will help our companies compete on that national level with foreign companies as well. And I think in terms of you're going to see a lot of rhetoric, right? And some of that could happen, right? But it's not easy. It's easy to have a plan of what you would do and if you were in charge, right? Sometimes it's very difficult once you sort of unpack what's going on to execute that plan. So we need to be ready to understand or to show the benefits of these programs and the good things that can be done with these programs and why they're important. That's part of that navigation, right? Navigating that federal process, whether it's the federal executive branch or even the Capitol Hill legislative branch.
Okay. One last thing, and let's do this. I have a bunch more questions, but we've got to open this up to the audience. Is what you just described, what we've just been talking about, accepting the Chinese industry in the United States. Is that something that you think will happen regardless, and of what happens in the election? Is it something that should happen?
So, you don't really see legislation or guidance from any administration that would limit investment in the United States typically, right? And so, the Chinese companies are free to establish production plants in the United States right now, right? I don't see that changing. Now, could there be legislation? Could there be executive orders that forbid certain countries' headquartered facilities from using their own money to establish production plants here in the United States? Possibly. Is that a battle that I think our political folks are going to want to fight? I don't think so, right? So yeah, I see it still an open door policy for U.S. investment, even of foreign investment in the U.S. So it's got processes that they have to go through, but at the same time, I just don't. I haven't seen it in the past. Maybe there are some examples where commercial businesses were not allowed to establish a production plant in the United States, but I think those are few and far between.
Yeah, yeah. Well, okay, it's true, and I'm not going to get stuck on this, and I am going to move, but just to put that there's no ban.
Yes,
Congress, a big outcry over the Ford plant in Marshall, and then the Goshen plant in Michigan, and BYD has held back. CATL also has held back because of the atmosphere. So even short of a ban, there can be an effective, hostile environment.
that's correct. Yes, that's a good example, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So okay. Let's look at some of these questions. And Dave, feel free at any point to interject thoughts, questions, whatever stuff that you think that that ought to be touched on. So let's look at this question from Jonas Clausen. So he says. Electrification naysayers bemoan the mining and recycling costs associated with energy storage, while the externalized costs of gasoline production and consumption are not factored into the current energy economic analyses. Besides incentivizing electrification infrastructure, what are ways gasoline production and consumption costs could stop being subsidized by the incumbent energy economy structure? That's a big question.
So, right. So in terms of crude oil subsidies, I'm probably not the best one to talk to on that, right? But you're right. There are subsidies either inherent or in the system or direct to continue to subsidize gasoline production. And I do think that you see more and more, the regulations that are being promulgated that would be difficult for combustion engines to meet some of those regulations. So, and some people would argue that, our entire defense budget goes to, protecting oil lanes, right? I'm not sure that's a good argument, but there's obviously some part to that argument. It does political consequences on where oil is right now, does, influence policy, right? And, but I'm not the best one to really talk about that.
Yeah. And
I
really,
mean, there's been books written on those types of things.
no, I agree. So let's take this question from Viju Chala, who says, thanks for a great webinar, but then asks, with all the recent news of EVs slowing down and currently dominant headlines of Tesla layoffs, where do you see future EV market growth drivers, policy, consumer demand, charging infrastructure improvement?
So yeah, that's that's a great question on what's going on today, right? And in my view, I was with the Vehicle Technologies Office for about 20 plus years in the Department of Energy, and when new technologies were coming online, what you would see is typically more of an S curve, not that nice um, parabolic curves going straight up when new technologies were coming into the market. And so I think that's what you're going to see even with electric vehicles. It's going to be more of an S curve, and what we want to see is that S curve sort of slanted up, right? There may be a time when there's a huge acceleration of market uptake to EVs, or it may just simply be a progressive increase in market intake. So, but along the way, you're going to have pluses and minuses, right? In terms of acceleration. And so, and I think that's hopefully what we see today, right? A couple of things. What are the market growth drivers? Well, obviously, continuing to reduce cost of the electric vehicle. Most of that cost is in the battery itself, so cost reduction is really important. But you can't have cost reduction and performance degradation, right? So you got to achieve that cost reduction and compete with the incumbent technology or do better, right? So that's going to be really important. Policy is important, and so you see some of that policy, whether it's EPA, corporate average fuel economy type policy, or things of that nature. I tell you, charging infrastructure is really important, right? And you see a lot of anecdotal problems that people have with the charging infrastructure now. So those issues, those barriers need to be overcome, and particularly public charging and fast charging.
Yeah. That's number one. Charging is numbers 1, 2, and 3. It seems like, right? I mean, no one will buy if they don't think that they can't charge and charge up fast. I'm interested in one thing you said. If I can interject, is it the latest numbers for the first quarter of this year in the U.S. hybrid sales rose 43%. EVs were up 2.7%. Is it possible that we're not in an EV transition per se, but a hybrid transition?
I think we're in an electrification transition, right? And so it's not only hybrids, but it's plug-in hybrids and all electric vehicles, and possibly at some point even fuel cell vehicles, right? But in terms of the electrification inflection point, I think that's what you're seeing. More electrification of the drivetrain, whether that's through all electric drivetrains or some type of hybrid electric drivetrain.
That's such an interesting observation. So that we could pick your year sometime in the future. We might see, after all of the Durham and Strang from this period, just simply a mix of all of the above, the ones you just mentioned.
Yeah, that's possible. Yes. Yeah.
I want to remind everyone we've got 5 minutes left of Dave's time. If you have burning questions, drop them into the box. We just had one of the like holy hell moments was yesterday. Well, over the last few days, but it sort of climaxed yesterday when it seemed like Elon Musk really did cancel the Model 2, at least for now. And so Matt Berg asks, I pose that as context. Matt Berg asks, how important is developing a sub $25,000 EV to boosting EV penetration in the U.S.?
Sub $25,000 that performs like the American consumer wants it to perform, that would go a long, long way, right? However, recognize that the average new sales of the average price of a new car today that's actually sold or bought is upwards of $40,000, right? And that's conventional vehicles. So, you do the marketing and the management and the strategic planning for a company. Which one do you go with? A super low cost EV? And I'm just going to caveat it that actually, performs like a comparative ICE, $25,000 less vehicle, or something that's a little bit more luxurious in the $40,000 to $45,000 range. Probably all of the above is right. So,
Is there so Dave, is the 25 that the focus on the $25,000 car, is that kind of a red herring?
no, I wouldn't call it a red herring at all. It's an affordable EV is important, but is it the end all be all of everything? Probably not, right? And but but to be affordable and impactful, that low cost EV needs to compete with lower cost or low cost conventional vehicles, right? Because that is the consumer that you're targeting. Someone that would spend money on a less than $25,000 or less ICE versus somebody that would buy an EV. And to do that, you need to meet them head to head. So the incumbent technology, as you called it, and one of the things that we always did in DOE was compare where we were on electric vehicle cost as a cost to an internal combustion engine vehicle cost. And so, that's what I'm saying. You really need to compare apples to apples here, because everybody is not going to be looking for a $25,000 or less EV. They don't do that today for internal combustion engine vehicles. So,
Yeah.
right.
So, okay, we have 2 minutes. We got a bunch of questions. Let me tell everyone, if you didn't get your question answered and you want it answered, if you email me, I'll filter stuff to Dave in a civilized manner that does not overwhelm him. steve@theinformation.com. There's a question here. Isabel Sheldon is asking. So I'm wondering about just sort of rephrasing what she's asked. So there's a lot of focus on long range. You brought up the 500 kilowatt hour per kilogram watt hour per kilogram battery. That's 500 miles. But if we get fast charging, do we need a 500 watt hour per kilogram battery? And do we need big batteries? If we get the the fast charging, could we do with less and therefore we get lower cost, and we're using less of of the critical metals?
So yes, I think that is a pathway, right? And I just looking at the question, a maturity point coming in the EV market where maximum range is not necessary. Yeah, I think that could be coming, right? There's going to always be folks that have one car and want to go the 500 miles or 400 miles before charging. If you have the fast charging, right, I don't know that that's going to be necessary. And when people get comfortable and confident in that infrastructure, comfortable and confident that they will be able to recharge fast when they need to, then that anxiety may go away. It's, in my mind, it's a matter of time.
Yeah. Okay. Dave, we went over by 1 minute. I didn't ask all of my questions. We didn't get to ask all of the audience questions. But as I said, email me and I'll get stuff to Dave. Dave, thanks so much for spending this time with us. And to the audience, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Steve.
Dave, Dave, can you still hear me?
I can.
Okay. I think we're off. Thanks so much. You were terrific.
Good, good.